Lauren, can you give me the ability to share?
Good morning, Christina and everyone else.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm having trouble signing in, guys. I keep getting this sign in with your email and password or SSO, Google.
Who's that? Is that Evelyn?
Evelyn.
Evelyn, you seem to be here.
Okay, well, I can't get rid of this picture, but I'll try. I mean, this other thing, it keeps saying leaving meeting. No, I don't want to leave the meeting. I'll just, let me see. Okay, I'm all right.
You're good?
Yeah.
Evelyn, I feel for you. I'm worse than you with technology, trust me.
I'm sorry. I'll mute myself again. I'm sorry. Thanks.
No, that's okay. So we'll wait another minute and then we'll get started with our mid-summer or getting now towards the end of summer breakfast with your broker. We're doing this basically every 2 weeks on Monday mornings, starting at 9:30. And Christina and I came up with a topic of relevance and concern to everyone. And then we always open it up to questions, as you know. So we can always take direction from anyone on the call as to what topic we'd like to do. If when I hear a question and I think we can all benefit and we have the time to handle it, we will gladly do that. We try to get you off the call by 10:30. So with that, I'd like to begin the session. As I say,
Hi.
Welcome. So the topics that I'd like to discuss with you today is the topic of under what conditions can we actually show a property, or can we actually go into a property, and who can be with us when we go into the property. And I'm talking about maybe before the property is under contract, but very much talking about when the property's under contract. And we have some direction in the agreement of sale. Not all the direction I would like to be there in an ideal world, but we have a lot of direction in the agreement of sale, paragraph 12A. So we're going to focus on paragraph 12A. But before we do that, I'd like Christina to refresh us on two standards of practice in the Code of Ethics. Do you think you could do that, Christina? Article 3 deals with cooperation between brokers, and Article 1 is just our obligations to our clients, whether they be buyers or sellers, but that would apply to listings within our own company, because we're not working with another broker's client when we show properties that are listed with our own company. We may think we are because it may be another agent in our office that we don't know that well or we don't see, and we may think they're at another company, but they're all at the same company. So Christina, do you think you could do those two standards of practice for us?
Sure. I was just trying to remember exactly which.
I can tell you which
ones they are. I was just looking at them because I had forgotten you wanted me to do that bit. But I think
this 1-16.
Thank you. That was the one I was looking for. 1-16, you said?
Yes, and then I'll take you to Article 3.
Okay.
After you're done with Article. So Article 1-16 pertains to listings that are listed with our own company.
All right, let me share the screen with you. So we're looking at the Code of Ethics. And on the right side of your screen, hopefully you can see one standard of practice 1-16. It's a little hard. For some reason, the document's a little hard to view sometimes. But standard of practice 1-16 says realtors shall not access or use or permit or enable others to access or use listed or managed property on terms or conditions other than those authorized by the owner or seller.
So let's talk about that, Christina. I'm a home inspector. I'm a termite inspector. I'm a, use and occupancy inspector. I'm another agent who wants to come through for a pre-settlement walkthrough. Another agent who wants to simply show the property. And this is a property listed with our own company. So what do we have to do?
You have to ask the listing agent, who presumably is getting direction from the seller, if you're allowed to access the property and when, and how you're going to do that. Is there a lockbox with a combination, or or whatever the directions are? And when you make that appointment, ask that permission for a specific purpose and a specific time. It is limited to that specific purpose and that specific time. So if you make an appointment for a walkthrough, you can't do an inspection. And if you are not a full home inspection, you can't bring an inspector along or bring a contractor along, or for that matter, you can't bring the whole family along unless that is the permission that you requested and were given.
Christina, I want to let our agents know that some of us get in trouble with our own sellers when we take it upon ourselves to let someone access the property, and the seller says, well, why didn't you tell me? How come I didn't know? And if the seller wanted to make a big to-do about it, he could make a complaint that you violated Article 116, Standard of Practice 116, because you didn't have the authorization from him or her, the seller or the owner, as we have it there.
Yeah. And if you, even as a listing agent, we know this is part of our process, but we can't take it for granted. When you arrange with the seller how showings will be handled, and if the seller gives you specific instructions about who has to confirm, or, the time, if showings can only happen on certain days or at certain times, then you as the listing agent can't take it upon yourself to say that there's, that you allow access at some other time or for some other reason. So, we know we have to take the seller's instructions at the beginning of a listing, but that continues throughout the entire transaction. And we have to remember that as listing agents as well, because sometimes just in facilitating the transaction, we get to be a little bit casual about it, especially if it's maybe a vacant property. And we sometimes assume that things are very flexible just because the property's vacant, but we still have to check.
Okay, so Christina, I was actually very involved in the creation of these standards of practice when I was the national chairman of the, I call it the Ethics Committee, the Professional Standards Committee. And we dealt with these too. And originally we only wrote the next thing we're going to see, Standard of Practice 3-9, which says almost the same thing as we just read a second ago in Standard of Practice 1-16. Article 3 deals with cooperation that is between brokerage companies, and Article 1 is the obligations that we owe to our sellers. So they go hand in hand. So let's now take a look at Standard of Practice 3-9. 3-9.
That's up at the top left or top right of your screen again, hopefully you're seeing that. And I'm just noticing the dates on these, and 3-9 was written first. It's dated, adopted in 2010, and the other one was 2012.
I know. I did both of those, Christina. When I say I did them, I was chairman of the committee, and I think right at that time, and then I was chairman of the subcommittee that works on these articles. So I was very involved, and I remember bringing the example forward, where the reason we needed 3-16 was because we had an agent, believe it or not, in our own company here at Keller Williams in Media, an agent who was going to rent a property that was listed with our company, and she took it upon herself to go into the house using the lockbox access without making an appointment with the seller. And everybody said, well, she violated Article 3-9, Standard of Practice 3-9. Well, she couldn't violate 3-9 because it was a listing with our own property. 3-9 only talks about listings that are with other brokerage companies. For most people right now, I'm splitting a hair that you probably don't completely comprehend, but that's okay. Let's read 3-9 and we'll see what it says.
So 3-9 sounds a lot like the one we just read, but it says realtors shall not provide access to listed property on terms other than those established by the owner or the listing broker. So the first one was talking about listings that the realtor broker represents, our own listings. And this is talking about listings represented by some other listing broker.
So let me explain. In Standard of Practice 1-16, it said you have to get the permission from the seller or the owner. In Standard of Practice 3-9, it says you get the permission from the listing broker or listing agent or the seller. So you can see how it's talking about a cooperative transaction there. But basically, it's the same idea. As you said earlier, Christina, you can't go into a house that's vacant, even if it has a lockbox on it. And shame on anyone who ever does that. Or imagine giving a combination to a buyer to a combination lockbox, or even to an inspector who hasn't had the confirmed appointment with the listing brokerage company or with the seller. So you can see how serious these obligations are. Do you want to say anything else about these two, Christina, or does anybody want to ask any questions about these two standards of practice that are embedded in our code of ethics that we are obligated to obey?
The only thing I'd add is that, we tend to get really, we tend to be really comfortable and therefore sometimes a little bit lazy or relaxed about accessing people's homes. And, because we do it all the time, every day. And most of the time, thank goodness, it all is perfectly acceptable and goes smoothly. But we have to watch out, and we have to take it really seriously when we or other agents run up against this as an issue, because we are dealing with people's personal properties and homes, and the rules don't change, or the amount of respect that we have for those properties should not ever change just because they're maybe older or vacant or not in good condition. That should never change how we treat somebody else's property. We have to treat every property with equal respect, even if it maybe doesn't, look the same, or even if it's, a less expensive property, doesn't mean we treat it differently. And, as showing agents, as buyer agents, showing buyers around, we have to respect people's times. And we, if you're half an hour late or half an hour early for an appointment, you can't assume that you are allowed to continue, to go in with access, because that's outside the time you were permitted. And we need to sometimes remind co-op agents about that, because it can create enormous problems. I think there are stories where, people's kids are home alone, or their dogs are home alone, or, just it's a vacant property, but someone moved back in for the weekend and to do work, or, they had a visitor who they allowed to stay there, and just accessing the property outside of our permission could be really disastrous.
And Christina, just in case someone's on this call who wasn't on the call we had probably 2 months ago, where we stressed that when you make an appointment to show a property, you make an appointment for you, the buyer's agent, to appear at the property, not some other agent, but you, the buyer's agent. If you're going to have a substitute, you need to explain that to the listing agent or the appointment center. But not only that, you're making an appointment to show buyers the property, not show it to a home inspector. You're not allowed to bring a home inspector with you on a showing. That is so taboo. It's incredible. Now, you can bring a home inspector with you on a showing, and he could even do a home inspection during that showing, provided you had the seller's permission. Once you have the seller's permission to do those things, that's great, except then the home inspector must provide a report, and the seller has access to that report. So be very careful with any home inspector or anybody who says, oh, since I'm going to make an offer without a home inspection, I want to bring a home inspector with me on the showing. That's a great strategy, but it has to be approved by the seller and the listing broker if it's another brokerage company. So be careful you don't fall into that violation of the law and the code of ethics.
Yeah. And needless to say, I mean, it should be needless, but you can't share your permission to access with somebody else. Just because you, an individual agent, is given permission to access a property doesn't mean you can give that to the buyer or to a home inspector or a person who's going to pick up the radon test. You cannot share that access information without permission. And this is, I say radon, that the radon test happens over a few days, we know, and quite often we're there with the inspector at the home inspection. As a buyer's agent, we are there, and the radon inspector says, can I come back in 3 days and pick this up? And we say, sure, here's the combination. No, that's we, buyer agent, are not the person who can share that. We do not have permission or authority to do that. So we have to, remember the boundaries and be really careful and respectful about how we handle other people's property.
And the other thing I'm sure people are thinking of in their mind right now is, well, even if you're acting correctly, how can you document that you're acting correctly? Well, that's where emails and even text messages, which hopefully you keep a record of those, they are permanent written records of your communication, getting that permission from the listing broker or from the seller. So I would say that that's better than, even though I love doing phone calls and I call up the listing agent, I say, by the way, the radon's going to be picked up Monday at 2:00. And I do that verbally, that's great. And the listing agent says, fine. It would be better to put that into an email, I would think.
I'll add one last thing that I don't think we said this time, but I know we talked about it before. Permission to access a property for a specific purpose, a showing, an inspection, etc. We have to remember that those purposes are limited. So one of the things that we run into these days are requests to do video or photographs or virtual showings, video showings, and those are not automatically permitted just because we were given permission to show the property. In showing time now, and in the MLS, we have different permissions for in-person showings versus virtual showings. So you can specifically request those. But if you want permission to go into a property and record video to share with your client or record video for any other purpose, you need to ask and get permission for that. You cannot assume that you have it.
Christina, I didn't know I was going to ask this question of you, and I truly consider you one of the experts on this, so I'm going to ask it. So I'm showing a property to a buyer with complete permission, everything's fine, and the buyer wants to do a video with their telephone. Maybe they're going to show it to their spouse who's not with them. Maybe they're going to do a live conversation with their spouse as they're walking through the house. Maybe they're going to take still photos as they're going through the house. Are they permitted to do that, any of those things, without permission?
So if we are speaking of the buyer, they're not a realtor and they're not subject to the code of ethics, but we're their agent if we're there with them and we're responsible for what they do. And this is a little bit of a gray area. So we as agents have to get permission. And if we knew in advance, we should mention it, we should ask for it. And, I think most of the time it would be granted. It's so much so we can almost assume that, but we're not permitted to assume it. So if our clients ask us, if they give us any warning that they're going to do this, we should get permission in advance. but the client themselves are not bound by the code of ethics. And we do have now in our PAR listing contracts and buyer agency contracts, assume it, again, assumptions are dangerous, but if the listing agent is using the standard listing contract and the buyer agent is using the standard buyer agency contract, then our clients should already have received notice that that photography and videography may happen, which isn't the same as automatic permission, but they are given notice, and they could have prohibited it, and they may not have. You may even be in a listing where you can see in the MLS and at the appointment center that virtual showings were permitted. It could be permitted in advance. So you may have some level of permission, but I still say it's a gray area because we can't exactly stop or control our buyer clients from pulling out their phone and taking a picture. And the code of ethics doesn't say we have to grab our client's hand and stop them from taking out their phone. But I think we have an obligation to warn them and to explain to them from the outset when we're giving them the expectations of the showing process, that they don't automatically have permission to do video and photography. And if they are going to do it, if we are going to get permission to do it, that they should, they don't have permission to share it. So it's one thing to speak to your spouse who couldn't be there, but another to, share on social media.
Jane so is pointing out that this is extra difficult when you're at an open house. And sure, but you can put up a sign at an open house saying no video or photography is to be done. You can, with COVID-19 still around, you can have only one person in the open house at a time and stay with them, and you can express to them that photographs are either allowed or not allowed. So I don't want to get bogged down in this topic. I do want to get to Article 12, to paragraph 12.
Sure. I think the last thing to say is that we should have this discussion with our sellers as well. We should talk to our buyers about it before we go out to see houses. We should talk to our sellers about it when they list and when we're talking about marketing and how showings are going to be done. We should also say, this could happen. If you want to prohibit it, you can prohibit it maybe and try and make that more effective, but otherwise it might happen.
And Evelyn is pointing out that we have photos in the MLS. Maybe we have, virtual tours already established. So you can point people in those directions. And that's a good thing to do when you're a listing agent. Let's go to paragraph 12 of the agreement of sale now, Christine.
Okay, yeah, but Evelyn, the fact that they are permitted, the listing agent has permission to do those, obviously, in a listing contract, which doesn't automatically give anybody else permission. It also doesn't automatically allow anybody else to use the pictures that are in the MLS for any other purpose. So it is still
no, but
limited.
What I was pointing out, Christina, is if you've done a good virtual tour as a listing agent, you can point that out to anybody coming through the open house, and you can share it with them for sure.
Yeah. Okay, you want the agreement of sale now?
Yes, paragraph 12A.
Coming up.
Okay, so 12A, but now when people talk to me and they say, well, what does the inspection paragraph in the agreement of sale say? Well, there were really 3 inspection paragraphs. They come together, paragraph 11, paragraph 12, and paragraph 13. Paragraph 11 talks about, waiver of inspection contingencies. If you elect them and you don't do them, you waive the right to do them. And paragraph 12 is the meat of the inspection contingency, when and where and what can you inspect. And paragraph 13 talks about what happens after the inspections. So I want to focus on paragraph 12 and 12A. 12 is called buyer's due diligence inspections. Christina has it on the top of the screen right now. And paragraph 12A talks about rights and responsibilities. What are the seller's rights and what are the buyer's rights? And perhaps what are the agent's rights in all these inspections? So the first thing is on line paragraph 3, line 312, paragraph 12A, subparagraph 1, where it says, and this is very important, seller will provide access to insurers' representatives. Now, stop. We got to, get over RDR. What's an insurance representative? Only someone from the insurance company. You're getting insurance from State Farm, and they send out a representative to inspect the house. That's an insurance representative. And besides insurance representatives, and as may be required by this agreement, okay, mortgage lenders, okay, so mortgage lenders get access to the property. Surveyors, municipal officials, those are the people who do the use and occupancy inspections, obviously. Appraisers, maybe appraisers hired by the buyer, but more likely hired by the mortgage lender. And inspectors. What do we mean inspectors? Well, any inspector that is allowed to come through the property. If we go on in paragraph 12, if we elect a home inspector, yeah, the seller has to allow the home inspector to come through. If we allow a radon inspection, seller has to allow that to take place. Even a swimming pool inspection, whatever those inspections are, the seller has to permit access to those people. In addition, I'm reading, in addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspections. So I get this a whole lot. Does the buyer's agent have to attend the home inspection? Is the listing agent allowed to attend the home inspection? Is the seller allowed to be there for the home inspection? And the answer is all parties are allowed to be there, but no one else is allowed to be there without permission from the seller, and no parties are obligated to be there. So the seller doesn't have to be at the home inspection. The buyer doesn't have to be there. Believe it or not, even the buyer's agent doesn't have to be there, but the seller has to permit it. Now, a little while ago when I opened this, I don't know if you were all here listening to some of my opening remarks, but I was saying we were going to study paragraph 12A, which provides us good direction on who can access the property when and for what purpose. And I even said it isn't as complete as I would like it to be. What's missing in what I just read is the when. In other words, can you actually insist that a seller allow the inspection to take place at 2 p.m. on a Saturday when he's having a wedding reception for his daughter in the backyard? No, I don't think so. So the seller is allowed to put some reasonable parameters on when you can come through to do these inspections. But people get upset with maybe the forms committee, Christina, you can think about this, for not writing a specific answer to that question of how can the seller actually deny access, since this paragraph says he will provide access. But there are some common sense
various language at the time, I remember.
Right. Okay. So let's not get hung up on that, but let's focus on something that you may not know is here because you may have had RDR. Did you know that during the home inspection, you can't bring your father or your mother or your brother who's a contractor? You can't bring anyone else to come to the property. You can't even bring your children to come to the property during the inspection because it said only parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspections. Now, the way you overcome that is you ask for permission, and you do it maybe in an email or a text, and you get written permission from the listing agent to allow you to bring mom or dad. If it's really going to be an issue, you need to discuss it with your buyers before they write the agreement of sale. When you get to paragraph 12A, you need to say, oh, by the way, buyer, you're going to get to do a home inspection. You can be there. Okay, I can be with you. But by the way, you can't bring your mother and father to the home inspection. And they say, oh, well, mom and dad are giving us money. Dad said he wanted to be with us. Well, then you would have to write that into the agreement. You would go to special clauses at the end of the agreement, and you would write the buyer's mother and father are permitted to attend inspections. You can even write paragraph 12A, subparagraph 1, amended, and you could write those words. So you have to be thinking about these details before you just rush and sign an agreement of sale, so that you prevent the seller getting upset later on, or the listing agent getting upset because you took someone who's not supposed to be at the property to an inspection, or your buyer got so disappointed because he couldn't bring someone with him that he thought was obvious that he could bring with him, and it's because you didn't do a good enough job explaining paragraph 12A, subparagraph 1, when you wrote the agreement. Anything, Christina, you want to say? You think I did it?
I think you got it. I just think, we do really truly run into a lot of problems with this, and you can't, once it has happened, you can't undo it, so the protective parents are the classic example, where the buyers bring along mom or dad, and then mom or dad sees something else wrong with the property that the buyers might not have seen, and you end up in a.
Yeah. So you not only violate the terms of the agreement of sale when you bring someone who's not authorized, but you also violate the article in the Code of Ethics that we went over a few minutes ago, depending upon whether it's an in-house listing or another broker's listing. You're going to violate Article 1 or Article 3 because the seller didn't give permission for these other people to attend. Okay, now let's get to paragraph 12A, subparagraph 2 on line 315. Buyer. Let me do something. Let me stay with paragraph 12A1 just a second about an appraiser. If a buyer waives their financing contingency, they're still allowed to get a mortgage, and therefore they would still be allowed to bring an appraiser through the property on behalf of the mortgage company. So let's just quickly look at paragraph 8A, Christina. I know it's annoying to have you do that, but that's this agreement of sale is one giant comprehensive puzzle that has all the pieces locked together. So you just have to look at paragraph 8A a second to remind everyone that a lot of what we think are cash offers are not really cash offers, because the buyer is still going to get a mortgage. Someone over the weekend was, saying, yeah, my buyer waived financing, but they intend to get a mortgage. It says it right there, buyer, mortgage contingency waived. This sale is not contingent on mortgage financing, although buyer may obtain mortgage financing, and or the parties may include an appraisal contingency. I'm not going to talk about appraisal contingency right now, but the point is the buyer may still get mortgage financing, and therefore the seller has to allow access according to paragraph 12A, subparagraph 1. We'll go back to it right now, to an appraiser, even if there is no mortgage contingency elected. So I just wanted to point that out to everyone. That's a great misunderstanding. I get that question frequently. So let's go back now to subparagraph 12A 2. And we will do buyer may make 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property. And here's another reason why a buyer can't bring a home inspector through the pre-settlement inspection. Because the reason for the walkthrough is for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is as required by this agreement of sale. And I always say the condition of the property was the condition it was in at the time the agreement was executed. So that is the condition of the property that you want to make sure it's in. Meaning if the air conditioning was working when you wrote the agreement of sale or did your home inspection, it has to be working at the pre-settlement walkthrough. Okay, it's got to be in the same condition. But that's what you're doing. You're not doing a new inspection of the property at any of these pre-settlement walkthrough inspections. Here's where the buyer gets a real strong hold. The last sentence says, buyer's right to these inspections is not waived by any other provision of this agreement. In other words, the buyer really gets 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections. The seller can't say, well, you know what, you had a home inspection and therefore you used up a pre-settlement inspection. No, pre-settlement inspections are stated here and they're not waived by any other provision of this agreement of sale. Okay. Now, the whole reason I thought about paragraph 12A is because over the past week or two and over the past year or two, we've had some extremely serious problems with real estate transactions that are under agreement of sale, where we may be the listing brokerage company, or we may be the buyer's brokerage company. We may represent the buyer, we may represent the seller, where the utilities are not on when these inspections are taking place. So it's in bold. It says seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuels. That means there's got to be fuel in the tank, at least enough fuel in the tank to run whatever it is that the tank is feeding, usually a house heater, okay, like oil, must have them on for all inspections / appraisals. Okay, so it's the seller's obligation to make sure. I had one seller in the middle of the winter, the cheapest guy in the world. This was a house I sold out near Longwood Gardens. He had, like, his oil tank was empty, and he didn't want to fill his oil tank before settlement because he knew the buyer, you can go to paragraph 7 to see this, the buyer gets whatever remaining heating oil is in the property. And this particular seller, it was the middle of a cold winter and he didn't want to fill the tank. So he kept putting like 10 or 20 gallons of oil in the oil tank every few days to keep the heat on in the house, so that when we came to do the pre-settlement inspections and all the inspections, there would be heat on. That seller was incredibly cheap, but he at least knew his obligation under this line of the agreement of sale. Now, a couple of things. Please pay attention, everyone. Every once in a while, we sell a property that's what we commonly call an REO, real estate owned. It's a terrible acronym, all real estate's owned. But what we mean by it is real estate owned by banks who now own the property, or asset management companies who now own the property and are not managing it. They are now managing it and they're getting it sold. Usually it's after a foreclosure, okay? And they make the buyers sign an addendum it's commonly called the REO addendum. Sometimes it's even a relocation company. It's the relocation addendum. Whenever you're asked to sign an addendum, and these addenda are expensive. Addenda is Latin plural for the singular addendum. Whenever you're asked to sign one of these addenda, okay, you need to read it, because the addenda is like an entirely new agreement of sale, and it changes a whole lot of what's in our agreement of sale. And common changes to these REO addenda have to do with inspections, and they also have to do with utilities. They often have the utilities turned off in the house, and the addenda say that the buyers are responsible for turning the utilities on for any inspections they want to have, for paying for those utilities for that short period of time, and for turning them off when it's over. And that is a pain in the you-know-what when you're dealing with the electric companies and the utility companies, the water and the perhaps the oil companies and gas. Can be very challenging. And we end up being part of that micromanaging of that, getting the utilities turned on. So, Christina, I want to see if you want to say anything about that topic right now.
No, nothing to add.
Wow, we're on an unusual Monday here, Christina. You're agreeing with me way too much. Okay, so be very careful. So now I'm going to go to the second part of the huge problem with this line 318. Seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuels, on for all inspections and appraisals. One of the main, believe it or not, inspections is the last of the two, or the last, if you only do one, pre-settlement walkthrough inspection that we just talked about in the previous subparagraph on line 315, a few lines up. So the buyer is often doing that pre-settlement walkthrough inspection right prior to settlement. which is what I always recommend. Sometimes it's the day before, but sometimes it's the morning of or the hour before the settlement. And that's not bad. In fact, one of the reasons why we like having 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections is if you do one a day or 2 or 3 or 4 days before settlement and you find something wrong that should be corrected, you have time to have the seller corrected and then come back right before settlement to check to make sure it's now working fine. So that last pre-settlement inspection, the utilities have to be on. Now, this is not written in the agreement of sale, and this is a lesson that unfortunately agents learn not on a Monday morning breakfast with your broker call. They learn it where they go to school, and the name of the school is Hard Knocks. Okay, and it's not spelled like Fort Knox, it's Knox, Knocks. It means you're taking a punch that you didn't expect to get, and you're learning from it. Hopefully, when you get that punch, you're going to learn a lot from it when you get that knock, and you're going to learn it for the rest of your life so that you don't make the same mistake twice. Or it's not even so much making a mistake, it's so that you take the preventative measures so nothing can go wrong with your sale. Truly, about 2 months ago, we lost an entire sale because of this line in the agreement of sale. Okay, I'll explain it to you in a minute. Not only did we lose the sale, we had the seller, the buyer ended up backing out because the utilities weren't on for the pre-settlement walkthrough inspection. And when the utilities finally came on, they shorted everything out. And it was a major electrical problem that the seller had to pay for. But settlement was missed, and the buyer didn't go to settlement. The seller then didn't go to settlement on the property. They were buying in New Jersey, which was another Keller Williams office that was a referral to us, or we gave the referral to them. And then that seller didn't buy a property. They were buying in Florida. 3 sales failed because agents and sellers and buyers weren't aware of what needed to be done as far as the settlement of the property and the transfer of the utilities. So here's the thing. We need to be very, very careful with our sellers to make sure that they do not call the utility company, call the electric company in particular, and have the electricity turned off on the day of settlement. If the seller is going to call to have the electricity turned off, notice I'm using the word turned off and not transferred. Okay, if the seller is going to call to have the utility turned off, please have it scheduled to be turned off the day after the scheduled settlement. And if that scheduled settlement doesn't happen on that scheduled day, you got to get on the phone and you got to stand there and make sure they don't come and turn off the power the day after what you thought was going to be settlement day, and now there's no power in the house. Okay, so please micromanage that with your seller. Okay, now with your buyers, you must get the buyers to make contact with the electric company and the utilities company before settlement to schedule the transfer. And it's no law that the buyers do this. They don't have to have electricity the day after they move into the house, but you want to make sure that they call to get the transfer set up. And this is where we're dealing with a third party that we cannot depend on. We can depend on ourselves, we can depend on our buyers, we can depend on our sellers, and we can depend on ourselves. There's an old Shakespeare line, I'm probably misquoting Shakespeare. He said, there's only 2 people in this world I trust, me and thou. And sometimes I have my doubts about thou. Well, we can only control me, okay? And thou we can do pretty well with if we have a one-on-one relationship with them, such as a buyer or seller. But we really have trouble controlling the actions and trusting the actions of a third party, such as a utility company, such as PECO. So you want to make sure, and this requires a lot of communication on the part of the agents and the buyers and the sellers. You want to make sure that the buyer has, well in advance of settlement, made arrangements to have the utilities turned into their name on the day of settlement. And you want to make sure that the seller stresses to the utility companies that the power is not to be turned off, but only possibly transferred into the name of a buyer who has already contacted them for that transfer. If no buyer has contacted the utility company, when the seller communicates with the utility company, the seller should not have the utilities turned off. So what you end up with is utilities that are turned off, unfortunately, during pre-settlement, before pre-settlement inspections, or before, or now after settlement, the buyer doesn't have electricity because they forgot to call. You don't want to be involved in that mess that happens when utilities are not on for the pre-settlement inspection and for when the buyer has their moving truck going in later in the day after settlement, or even 3 days later. You want to make sure, and there's nothing in the agreement of sale, there's nothing in the code of ethics that deals with this other than the fact that you have an obligation to do what's in your client's best interest. And whether you represent the seller or the buyer, it's in your client's best interest to make sure that this coordination takes place correctly. And you're going to learn that either by paying attention right now and never forgetting it for the rest of your life. But there are a few agents in the office that learned it in the school of hard knocks, and hopefully they will never forget it for the rest of their real estate career. And no matter how many times you learn it, you still forget it. I forget it sometimes. Christina probably forgets it. We try to make sure we take care of it. It should be on that, that check off list that we have, what we need to make sure we get accomplished. It's like remembering to put gas in your car when you're taking a road trip. Let's hope that Anne-Marie and Betty Ann don't run out of gas. Any thoughts about what we're talking about?
Dominic, I just wanted to add something.
Yes.
A lot of people are very confused by PECO's policy of when they take the utilities out of your name. If you call and say, I want them taken out of my name on June 1st, the end of their day is 9 a.m.
Right. And that's horrible. That's why I say, make sure you do it the day after settlement. See, if settlement's going to be on August 16th, if you're going to do that, you say do it on August 17th. And then you won't have the problem. But even better than that is making sure that the buyer has called to have them transferred into their names. Get that closure. And I know it's difficult because we may be great communicators, but the agent on the other side of the transaction may not be a great communicator, and they may not want to pay attention to this detail about their client's utility changes. So we just have to do our best to make sure the mistakes don't happen. And the mistake will never happen if you remember what I just said, and you remember what Holly just said. Holly's pointing out that PECO considered the end of the day to be 9 a.m. That's pretty early for the end of a day. But if it's the day after settlement, or maybe 2 days after settlement, it's not going to cause you a problem, right, Holly? It's only when you treat it as the day of settlement that you're going to have the problem.
I was going to say that you're right. If you say the next day, you should be fine, except for if something happens and it doesn't go to settlement. If your seller is not well aware that that clock stops at 9 a.m., then they could be in trouble. So I even made my own little form where I send to sellers to have them acknowledge that they understand that, PECO changes their time at 9 a.m. and they have to make sure that they have the utilities on.
I love this. I love this. I love what you're saying, Holly. And where did you get that form? Was it at a school you went to called Hard Knocks?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Holly. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And sharing is a wonderful thing, Holly, and I want to thank you for that. That's great. Anybody else would? Yes.
It's Evelyn. I had something like that happen a few years ago with a rental, and it was really a bad situation. But and actually, the tenant didn't do what he was supposed to do. But I always have a conversation with my sellers about this, because they always say, oh, okay, I will call and tell them to turn it off. And I'm like, no, no, no. You explain to them you're having a settlement that day and you want to, I tell them to ask for a reading and that you want to transfer it to the buyer. I really, you know, sometimes just the verbiage in talking to Pico can really make a difference. But Holly made a great comment, and that is, you know, have something written also for the seller to see.
Yes, but and Holly, believe me, I think that is really important because remember, it's about communication. But being able to say after the mistake happens, well, I gave that to you in writing and you didn't pay attention to it. Remember, everybody's got, not just realtors don't read EDR, everybody doesn't read. You know, it's still the getting your closure for yourself to make sure that nothing's going to go wrong. Because when something goes wrong, even if you did nothing wrong and you tried everything to do everything right, it's still going to be a human problem. It's still going to cause human suffering, you know, and you have no idea how this touches a nerve in my own makeup. I once learned the phrase that frustration comes from unfulfilled expectations. And my frustration, and it's part of my job as a broker, is to share with you all the things we need to do so things don't go wrong and we represent our clients. And when we don't do those things, things go wrong. And I get frustrated. And that's because I have these expectations that don't get fulfilled. So, you know, how much of a nerd do we want to be? How insistent do we want to be? But yeah, let's be aware of this, because when it happens, it can cause great human suffering and pain. You know, maybe the heat's going to be off in the winter, that
Right.
type of discomfort and human pain. But what about three transactions falling apart and never going to settlement? People who depended on it, they were older people, they had moving vans packed, and all three settlements fell apart because this happened. I didn't tell you the story exactly, but the seller called to have Pico, transfer the electricity, and she said turn off. And she said she told them to do it the day after settlement, but they did it the morning of settlement, like Holly just said. And then the power wasn't on for the pre-settlement inspection. And when it came on, everything shorted out. It was one perfect storm after another. But we need to try and prevent that, so we prevent those human, discomforts and human sufferings and tragedies. Anybody else want to ask or put anything else on the table about this?
Dominic?
Yes.
Just recently, I had a settlement last Friday. My seller called August the 2nd, or excuse me, July the 2nd. No, wait a minute, August the 2nd, to have the electricity, called Pico to have everything turned over to the buyer's name and have the reading and everything done for last Friday. And when the buyer called, they said, well, we haven't heard anything from the seller. Well, fortunately, they went back and checked their notes and they had the note, but the person that my seller spoke to didn't do her job and put the note through. So fortunately, both agents were telling their buyer and seller to do what they had to do. So we caught the problem in time. Right.
Now, let me also share with you, this is also true for water and water service. And I know this is going to be a little high level, but let me lay it out there for you. In most of the in some of the suburbs where the water is owned by Chester Water, but not in the suburbs where the water is provided by Aqua PA, and in Philadelphia where the water is provided by the city of Philadelphia. Whenever the utility, by the way, in Quakertown, you get electricity from your municipality. Whenever the utility is owned by a municipality, the city of Philadelphia, the city of Chester, the borough of Quakertown, whenever it's owned by a municipality, you need to get through settlement by having clear title, and you can't owe any taxes, and you can't owe any municipal bills, which are similar to taxes, such as a water bill in Philadelphia or where the water is serviced by Chester Water Authority. So part of your conveyancing is to make sure you get that final reading of the utilities so that the bill gets paid correctly and prorated correctly, because you're not going to get clear title. You're going to have the title company, even though they don't hold escrow in general, they will hold a little bit of escrow for final things like water bills and things like that. So that's something else that's going on in this story I wanted to bring out to everybody. Now, I want to take
Dominic,
yes.
this is Jane, sir. We always remind our sellers not to cancel their homeowners insurance until they walk away from the closing table.
Oh, for sure. That goes with that's a great point, Jane. That's great.
Because you just never know, things could
Right.
get delayed, you know?
You never know. Look, when you forget about the utilities and they turn the utility back on and it shorts out, it could burn the entire house down. We had a year and a half ago, we had a barn where we kept our horses burned down completely because of an electrical short. I mean, you can't believe these things happen. So yes, please do not turn a day's worth of insurance or even an extra week's worth of insurance. It doesn't cost much. So you're right, Jane. Thank you. That's another great one. And it's not spoken to in this paragraph at all. It's just, the common sense. You also have to notify the post office to change your address. There's all sorts of things you need to do, when you're moving. But yeah, absolutely, Jane. That's great. Okay. So the next line in paragraph 12A is 12A subparagraph 4 on line 319. Now, it says all inspectors, including home inspectors, are authorized by buyer to provide a copy of any inspection report to the broker for the buyer. This is confusing because okay. First of all, the home inspection law says that sellers, owners of properties are entitled to a free copy of all home inspection reports. This extends that statement beyond inspection reports. Beyond home inspections to all other inspections, radon, termite, swimming pool, septic, water, to all of them. So all of those inspectors, see, an inspector may say when you contact them that, well, they don't have the authority to give you, the seller's agent, a copy of the inspection report. Well, yes, it's in writing in the agreement of sale that the buyer gives that permission. But I know what Christina wants to do, and I want to do the same thing. We'll go quickly to paragraph 13B. Let's stress it because I don't know why agents forget it all the time. Paragraph 13B has to do with what happens after inspections. And paragraph 13B clearly says no matter what, the seller gets written copies of all inspection reports when they're finished. Christina, can you take us to 13B?
Well, really quickly, I think 12 is sort of more important at the moment. And you sort of mushed two lines together because it says that inspectors.
Oh, yes, I went ahead to
fire
5, sorry.
Agents copies, but they will also, on the line below that at 5, the seller has a right to request a copy free of charge. But it says that the seller has a right to get a copy from the party for whom it was prepared. So home inspectors in the home inspection law are required to give a copy to the seller if the seller wants one. But any other inspector might not. But
Christina, I have to correct you. I helped write the home inspection law. The home inspection law specifically says that home inspectors have to give the inspection report to the party for whom it was performed, the buyer. The home inspectors in the law asked to not have the responsibility to give it directly to a seller. And that's not in the law. What's in the law is the sellers have the right to get a free copy from the buyer.
Right.
That's what's stated
at 5.
That's what's stated there. What we did in the agreement of sale is we upped the ante, and in subparagraph 4, we said, no, now you home inspectors are authorized to give the copy directly to the buyer, to the seller. It's not in the law, it's in the contract of the agreement of sale. So sometimes the home inspector says, in order for me to give that copy to your seller, I need written authorization from the buyer. And that's where you say, we have it. It's line 319 in the agreement of sale. It's initialed and signed by the buyer. Here's a copy of it. That's what we did when we created this clause in the agreement of sale before your time, Christina.
Right.
Okay,
Then you wanted to go to 13.
13B.
Right. Then paragraph 12 is in effect even when all inspections are waived, because you still
Right.
have paragraph 12, even if you do not elect anything to make paragraph 13 apply. But when you get to paragraph 13 and you have under paragraph 13B, 1, 2, and 3, those are your three options in your inspection contingency. Option 1 is where you accept, option 2 is terminate, option 3 is the corrective proposal. But each one says, present all reports, present all reports, present all reports.
And their entirety.
Yes. So no matter what you do after your inspections, even if you accept the property exactly the way it is, you must present all reports to the seller.
Right, no matter what, the seller gets a copy, and not just the summary page, all reports in their entirety. And remember, after the seller gets these reports, if the sale falls through, the seller has them, and then he needs to change his seller disclosure. If he puts the property back on the market, he needs to either change his seller disclosure, or even better, it says he could add the inspection reports directly to the seller disclosure. So let's finish the call by going, actually, we really did finish everything, because as I said, I was jumping ahead.
Can I ask one question?
Please do, Beth.
Does the seller have the right to ask you not to give them a copy of the?
No. In the law,
I
the seller
thought
has the right to not ask for a copy. But once the seller signs the agreement of sale, he is now obligated to accept the copies of those reports, Bev. Great question.
And Bev, it would be very unwise for a seller to not have copies of reports, because it's a much, much greater risk to the seller and to the agent when that information is out there, but you don't know what it is.
It's one of the risk reduction reasons why the Forms Committee made this major change about 3 or 4 years ago to the agreement of sale, to actually require the seller to receive and accept those inspection reports. And that's what paragraph 13B does.
Mhm.
Great question, Bev. Anybody else? So there's a lot going on in paragraph 12A. It's really, really important that you go over it with your sellers in particular, but also with your buyers, to let them understand what's going to happen when they do all their inspections, and when their appraiser comes through the property, when their insurance representative comes through the property. By the way, I don't know if you know it or not, if you go back to paragraph 12A, technically the buyer and the buyer's agent are allowed to accompany the appraiser through the house, or accompany the insurance inspector through the house. The buyer and the parties and their agents and their licensees are allowed to be present for all inspections that were named in paragraph 12. Any inspections that take place. Okay, anything else from anyone, Christina, or we're pretty good on time today?
I don't see anything, and I think we are over. So
Okay, keep those great questions coming in, because we need topics for 2 weeks from now, but I'm sure it's going to be the results of some disastrous transaction that doesn't happen between now and 2 weeks from now. I'm a reactionary. You should know that by now. Okay, thank you for being here. Have a great end of the summer, and we'll see you at the next class. I think it's right before Labor Day. Okay, have a good one. God bless. Bye.